Without doubt, as a trainer, I would have to say that my absolute favourite feature of virtualization is snapshots. You see, I build a lot of labs. In fact, pretty much hardly a day goes by where I'm not building a new virtual machine, whether it's to test something out in a lab or to help teach someone else a new piece of software or technology, and I need to install a new operating system or a new domain controller or a copy of Exchange SQL Server, or sometimes even a whole network of machines. And as you can imagine, that takes a lot of time. Now, years ago though, all I could do was build a new machine each time I needed to test something new or teach something new. But since modern virtualization software like Hyper-V came along, all that's changed. You see, now I could just build one machine here, and I'd configure it to how I'd like my base machine to be. I would set up things like its host name, I would set up its IP address, setting things like the screen resolution. I'd update it with the latest patches, and generally things like that. You know, the general things you do when you build a new machine. But rather than using this machine, the very first thing I do, once I consider this machine to be complete, is I take a snapshot of it. Then I'm free to go about my business and start completing the lab. I can test some software on this machine, I could teach a class, whatever I need to do. At the end of the day, I simply revert back to my original snapshot and my lab is back the way it was, just as if I'd never even touched it in the first place, and it's ready to go for another day. So that's my number one reason for loving snapshots. But I'm sure that when you yourself start using them, you're going to come up with your own reason for loving them as well. Maybe it's this. Have you ever taken your piece of hardware here, and on that you've installed a piece of software, or you've made a change to your system and you'd really wished you'd never done it? Well, if you said no to that, then either you're really lucky or you haven't been in IT too long, since it's inevitable that one day you'll do something that simply prevents your server from working, or perhaps it kills your application, or deletes some data, or something you just wish you could undo. Well, that's another reason why you too should love snapshots. They give you the ability to roll back changes that you wish you hadn't done. So, if you haven't yet seen, heard, or used about snapshots before, you are in for something special. Now, when you think of the term snapshot though, you probably think of a photograph more than anything else, and although a snapshot in Hyper-V terms really has nothing to do with a photo or a screen capture, it's similar to a photographic snapshot in that both a camera and Hyper-V both use snapshots to grab a copy of something. A camera grabs a copy of a specific image, a specific moment in time. A Hyper-V snapshot grabs an image of a virtual machine exactly as it is at that very moment in time as well. So, even though snapshots sounds like they're amazingly useful, and don't get me wrong, they definitely are, they're not intended to be a replacement for regular backups. A snapshot is really designed for rolling back changes and not for recovery purposes, mainly because its purpose is to take a copy of the virtual machine as it is right now, including what's open in memory and any connections that are going on, and it's going to freeze them in place in the form of the snapshot. When you take a snapshot of a virtual machine though, you're going to be in one of two possible scenarios. You'll either create a snapshot when the virtual machine is powered off, or you'll create a snapshot when the virtual machine is powered on. So firstly, let's go and open up Windows Explorer, and I'm going to go to my C drive and the VM folder, since in here this is where our VHD file for our Windows 2008 virtual machine lives. So currently we've got this Windows 2008.vhd file. This is our virtual hard disk, and as you can probably tell from the size of this file, around 8 gig, this is the main file for our virtual machine. So let's leave this Windows Explorer window open here, and let's go to our Hyper-V console and create a snapshot. Now, like I said a moment ago, when you create a snapshot, you'll either create a snapshot when the virtual machine is powered off, or you'll create a snapshot when the virtual machine is powered on. Well, as you can see, our Windows 2008 virtual machine is running, so it's on at the moment, and that's fine. We'll create a snapshot by right-clicking on our virtual machine and then choosing Snapshot. Now, since this virtual machine here is largely unused, it should only take a few seconds to create a snapshot. But on a heavily used virtual machine or a heavily used Hyper-V server, you might find that this will take a little bit longer than what you just saw here, but it still should be very quick. So now that our snapshot has completed, let's switch back to Windows Explorer, and you'll notice that we've now got a snapshots folder. And if we open that up, in here we're going to have two folders and an XML file. This XML file contains the current configuration of this virtual machine, and you'll note, if I expand this out, that the XML file here uses the same name as one of these two folders. And if we open up the other folder though, you'll note we have in here a VHD file, or a VHD file rather. So this a VHD file, and you'll note here that I've got two, mainly because I have two hard drives in this machine from the previous video. So in your situation you may notice that you only have one. So this a VHD file is what's known as a differencing file. This differencing file contains all of the changes that we've made to this virtual machine since that last snapshot. So now that we've got an active snapshot, no longer does Hyper-V write to the original VHD file anymore. Instead, that original VHD file becomes a read-only file. It still contains all of the data that it did before. It's just that from this point onwards, any new changes to our virtual machine, in other words, as we use this virtual machine and data is written to the virtual hard drive, it's now written here to this AVHD file, this differencing file. And this now becomes the writable hard disk. So all changes are written here from this point onwards, and none of them are going to be written back to our original VHD file. Now you'll also come to realize that when we create, let's go back to the right folder here, when we create a new snapshot, we'll also be creating a new AVHD file, and that's going to become the current writable file, and it'll contain the differences since the last snapshot. So let's do that. Let's go back here to our Hyper-V console, and we'll right click on our Windows 2008 virtual machine, and let's again choose Snapshot. Now let's go back to our snapshot folder here, and what do we see now? We see an extra set of AVHD files. So we've got our most recent one here. This one becomes the new writable file, and this file is going to grow as we write data, and the previous one is just going to contain whatever differences we had before we snapshotted the original VHD file. So this is going to continue each time we create a new snapshot, up to a maximum of 50 snapshots per virtual machine. Now, although it's unlikely that you're going to want to create 50 snapshots, and 50 is the maximum you can create for each virtual machine, but what happens if you've got a couple of snapshots in your system, just like we do now, and then we want this latest snapshot to be our new baseline image? Well, if that's the case, then what we'll want to do is we want to merge all of these AVHD files into the original VHD file, and we can see that one there. So to do that, let's just go back to those folders there. To do that, all we need to do is to shut down our virtual machine. So let's do that now. We'll just open her up. So we'll click shut down. Okay, it's been shut down. So now let's just minimize this here. And down here in the snapshots section, let's just right click on our most current snapshot, and we could choose to delete that snapshot, or we could choose to delete the entire snapshot subtree as well, depending on where in this hierarchy of snapshots we are, or if we don't want to retain any of them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete the entire snapshot tree. So what we'll do is we'll right click on any of these really, and we'll choose to delete the snapshot subtree. Then we'll choose delete. And I will say that you shouldn't be tempted to go and delete these AVHD files directly. You certainly don't want to do that, because the Hyper-V console is going to take care of that for you when you delete your snapshots anyway. So now that our virtual machine is shut down, here you can see Hyper-V is doing its magic. What it's doing is taking these AVHD files and it's merging them back into the original VHD file. Alright, well, it's done its thing, and the result is now that we don't have any snapshots here, but we do have our original Windows 2008 VHD file, just like we saw when we created our virtual machine for the first time. And you'll notice that the size of this file has increased a tiny bit as well. Okay, well, you might also note that we do have an additional folder here, our virtual machines folder. But before we talk about that, I'm just going to start up our Windows 2008 virtual machine real quick. And let's go inside our virtual machines folder. And inside here, we've got one folder and an XML document. So let's open up this folder here. And inside here, if I can expand this, you'll note that we've got two files. We've got this bin file, which is obviously a large file. And this file is an image file which contains our virtual machine's memory. And then we've got this .vsv file which contains our virtual machine's state information. So in addition to these two files, inside our snapshots folder, when we take a snapshot, you're going to see two more files like these, which again contain differences just like with our hard disks. Alright, so now that we understand how a snapshot looks behind the scenes, let's take a look at how we can apply snapshots. Now obviously I don't actually have any snapshots here because we just deleted them a moment ago. So let's go and create a few. But before we do that, I'm going to go and log in to this virtual machine. Okay. Alright, well, now that we're logged in, let's go and open up a copy of Notepad, and I'm going to type in snapshot 1. Alright, now let's just move back to our console here, our Hyper-V console. We'll right click and we'll choose snapshot. Okay, you can see that snapshot's taking place there and it's pretty quick. Alright, well, now our snapshot's completed. I'm going to select our snapshot here. We'll right click. I'll choose to rename it and I'll give it a name. I'm just going to call it 1. Now obviously if this was a production machine, I wouldn't give a real production machine snapshot a name of 1. I'd call it something a little more appropriate, like just before I installed SQL Server or just before I installed patch XYZ. But for the purposes of my lab here, 1 is a good name just to identify the order of things. Alright, well, let's go back to our Windows 2008 server and let's change the notepad to say snapshot 2. So we'll go back to our console, we'll right click and choose snapshot. Again, that's humming along pretty quickly. What are we talking? 7, 8, 9, roughly about 10 seconds there for a snapshot to take place on this system here. Okay, well, let's grab our snapshot again. We'll right click. I'm going to call this one 2. And let's go back to our server one more time. We'll call this one snapshot 3. And we'll go back to our console. And yet again, we'll create a new snapshot. In a moment, we'll have 3 snapshots. So now that we've got a few, here's how we can work with them to best effect. And let me just quickly rename this one before we get too far in. Alright, there we go, 3 snapshots, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we've gone through 3 changes with our virtual machine. First, we'd opened up Notepad and we'd had snapshot 1 text typed in there. Then we had snapshot 2, and then snapshot 3 text, and that's where we're at right now. Now, even though the changes that I made to this system, just changing some text in Notepad, that's pretty trivial. These changes could have been serious ones, like perhaps each snapshot could have represented us installing a new application, or a new patch, or trying out a new script. Any of these changes could be potentially harmless or potentially catastrophic. Thankfully, we've got these snapshots now, and we can use them to roll back our Windows 2008 system to a moment in time before any of these changes was made. So when we want to roll back, we've got 2 ways to do it. We could right click here and we could choose to revert to a previous snapshot, or we could simply select a snapshot, right click and choose apply. Now, to be honest with you, I really don't see the point in having these 2 options, since basically they do the same thing, which is to activate to a previous snapshot. The only difference between the 2, however, is that when we choose to revert to a previous snapshot, it'll go back to the most recent one. In other words, we'll go from 3 to 2. But when we apply a snapshot, well, we have the choice to go to which one we want. So we're currently here at snapshot 3. So let's go to our Windows 2008 virtual machine here, and let's just type in some junk. There we go, over the top of our Notepad document to simulate a change we've made to our system. Now, we'll go back to our Hyper-V console here, and we'll right-click on our Windows 2008 virtual machine, and we'll choose Revert. Now we'll be asked to confirm our choice, so we'll click Revert. And what's going to happen is our machine's going to turn itself off, and then it's going to apply the most current snapshot. And as you can see, that's just how quick it is. We're now back just before that change was made, and everything is exactly the way it was. So if that change was something more serious than just some text we'd replaced in Notepad, let's say we'd installed a security patch and it corrupted our application, we'd be in trouble. But trouble no more, since we could easily create a snapshot, install the patch. If everything's okay, delete the snapshot. If we have a problem, we can revert back to the snapshot, and we're back with the old system intact and no one's any the wiser. Now, if like me though, you've got multiple snapshots and you want to roll back to a specific one, let's say our second one here, then reverting isn't going to help. In this case, we'll simply right-click on the snapshot and we'll choose Apply. Now this time you can see we're given 3 options here. We could simply apply the change and make that snapshot active. We could cancel, of course, if you want to back out. And we've also got the ability to take a snapshot right now of our system the way it is before we go back and apply our number 2 snapshot. That way, if we do go back to a previous snapshot and maybe that snapshot's in a worse state than this one, at least we can come back to this moment right now. So let's just click Apply, and we'll go back here to our virtual machine. And this time, we're back at snapshot 2. So this is all pretty easy, as you've just seen. It's really only a couple of clicks and we're back in business. You've never restored a system that quick. So in this video, you've seen that it's simple to create snapshots in Hyper-V. It's just as simple as right-clicking and choosing snapshot, really. To restore a system back to the way it was is as simple as applying the snapshot. Now, if you've ever had to rebuild a system before due to a bad change or a bad patch or something unexpected, the ability to snapshot is likely to make you to want to virtualize everything. It's that useful. So try it out. I'm sure you're going to love it. We hope you've enjoyed this video and would like to thank you for watching.